Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Stand By for Tones podcast. My name is Sam. It is good to see you again, and we are so excited to bring to you another episode of a fun and exciting podcast. We got a lot in store tonight, but first, I want to remind you guys about our website. You can visit us at www.standbyfortones.com. Get our books on Amazon. We got 2 books out there. We have our free app. We have all sorts of resources, our brain dump sheet. So just come visit us, whether it's by Facebook, Amazon, or our website. And thank you so much for joining us every time we come out here. So today we got a pretty big episode. We're going to introduce somebody who's kind of behind the scenes most of the time. And he's one of my favorite guys. We met quite a long time ago doing education for our local ambulance agency. This is Dr. Burtis. And we're going to let Dr. Burtis talk here a little bit. I got some questions for him. And Chuck, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a fun opportunity to be here. And so, yes, I am a full-time emergency room doctor is kind of what my jam is, just a regular doctor. I'll say that.
And you're more than just a regular doctor. We have fun.
Regular guy. But I've served as a medical director for about the last 8 years, both in fire-based EMS, private EMS, and helped supervise some critical care teams as well. So
nice,
got my feet wet doing that, and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
And we've worked together for quite a few years now. I can't remember. It's probably been, been in the area probably 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah, about 5 years now.
Yeah, about 5 years now. So primarily an ER doc, gone medical director. Why the big shift there?
Yeah, it was, it started a while back. I had a really good mentor that kind of introduced me to EMS when I lived out in another state, and gave me the opportunity to be like an assistant. And then, I became a full-time director at another agency. But it kind of was, I had a lot of inspiration from family members growing up that were in EMS. I kind of looked at what they would do, and I was inspired by that. And then when I was in medical school, I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and so one of the requirements for one of our rotations, we had to ride with EMS. And I remember one of the field supervisors for the Milwaukee Fire Department took me out, and we ran a code. I did my first chest compressions, and, they threw me in the back of the ambulance and took every turn they could, to shake me up in the back. And, I came stumbling out, barely could stand up, but I ran my first code, and I got hooked on that adrenaline. And then I sort of kind of felt a kinship to EMS providers, because I felt like my job was very similar to, I wouldn't be on the scene, but, I'd have people dropped off on my doorstep, and it would be kind of like those basic, I just found that kinship to them more than other providers in the healthcare system. So it was a chance for me to kind of go back to those roots and sort of become an advocate for EMS.
That's awesome, man. Like, we don't get that a whole lot kind of in our realm because, I grew up in a very small rural EMS agency. There's like, couple ambulances, less than 2,000 people in our hometown. And, we didn't get that interaction like we see in these bigger rural facilities, what we're able to offer in Southern Idaho. How do you feel about, docs being more involved in some of those EMS, like ride-along rotations? Do you feel like that's a good thing for them to go out and actually see what we do?
Yeah, I really do. I think that it's especially eye-opening, and I think nurses should do that too, and locally we do that. But basically, to realize how hard it is to, get a patient history or just even find out what's going on at the scene half the time, with people, the chaos that's that you run into, and all the, just there's a lot more variables at play. And so I think it really gives a lot more respect to EMS when people can see that. I think we forget in the hospital side of things, we have a lot more structure. And so I think that it would be very helpful for more docs to experience that.
Yeah. Kind of an off question here from what we kind of got planned. What do you, how far along were you when you first went on that first code and did your first chest compression?
Yeah, I was a third-year medical student, so it was like there's like weird rotation where we did anesthesia, so we did a bunch of intubations, and then we, like we had to, by the way, you have to run with the fire department, and, it was kind of cool. I mean, I felt like they treated me very well. They let us, they I got to eat dinner with them. Like that was something like, hey, you work with us, you're going to eat with us. And
that camaraderie side of things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think I really had a good experience with that. And so, I forgot what the other part of your question was, but where was I? Yeah. I was just a third year medical student, and I thought I was going to, I was really interested in surgery at that point.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably one of the formative experiences that made me kind of think, hey, I actually kind of like emergency stuff. It's kind of cool to get in there and take action and being able to call shots when things are hard. And so that was an opportunity that was very formative.
That's cool. Because I mean, like, paramedics, we go through, a year at max, 2 years of training. And then it's just like, okay, here's all your didactic education. Here's some ambulance ride time. And then it kind of falls into all of these really complex procedures that were taught over a year compared to, the physician and nursing and NP counterpart. And it just seems, it's just wild to me to think that it was 3 years into your medical school more than anything before, you really got that first emergency hands-on, patient contact in that kind of realm. And that's just it's really kind of cool to me and interesting at the same time, because we see these, we go through ACLS with a lot of physicians when we do our every 2 years, and we get the hospitalists and, some other people that we don't really interact with during cardiac arrest. And it's always just kind of fun to watch their brains think kind of down to, the lower end of our spectrum of our cardiac care in those situations. But like, you guys are human too, and go out and do all of these things, and who knows where you could be. It's fascinating to me, the vast difference of, education, and then some of the similarities in our scope, which is just kind of one of those things that has always kind of piqued my thought of like, where can we take paramedicine in the years to come? And, it's just kind of an interesting thought.
Oh yeah. It's interesting. You say like the scope of practice isn't really that different, and that's the honest truth. That's one of the things I noticed where, I'll do, I intubate, central lines, those kind of things. There may be just a few procedures that I do that you don't do in EMS or critical care, but for the most part, like the hard procedures that are really high risk, crikes, things like that. Those are all things that paramedics can do, or at least depending on your state, of course. But, it kind of inspiring to me, I get into this job and I'm like, becoming, or at least trying to become an expert in resuscitation. That's kind of what my opportunity or my job is. And so, I think, well, hey, actually, by the way, there's a whole group of people who are generally very good people, want to help others, and they want to do these same things. You just need to jump on board and help them out. You know what I mean? That was like, well, who wouldn't want to do that, right? And so that was kind of that was one of my other inspirations to become EMS, because, like, hey, I'll have another funny story for you if it's not too much of a distraction. But when I was in residency, so I'm in a brand new emergency resident, and I was in Ohio State. I think I can say that. Yeah. And I was doing my training, and one of my senior residents, she's German, and she had a very thick accent. She's like yelling at me, Burtis, come in here, intubate, and so I was like, I'd never done an intubation before. And the Columbus Fire and EMS guys rolling with a dude, and he's tripod and looking bad, so she gives me a Mac 3 and a ET tube, and she's like, and I kind of just zone out at this point, and I just, man. It was great though. It's like my first, live tube. I just, first try, pass it, I'm like, boom, feeling good. And then, the paramedics are all there, with their eyes are all huge. And I'm like, what happened? And they're like, oh, didn't you see that your senior resident just prepped the neck? Like she put, betadine all down his neck, got ready to do a crike. And that was, I totally missed that because I was in the zone. But, like it was sort of a funny thing where, that was another time where the EMS guys got to see my first. And so it was kind of fun, the Columbus Fire.
That is
EMS
so
guys.
Funny.
Yeah.
Oh, you do good impressions, man. That was good.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. She might. I won't say her name, but she was really cool, and she was. It was kind of fun because she could have easily wanted to do that intubation on her own, because she, residents always want to get more procedures, but hey, I'm going to take this new guy under my wing, and I'm going to, get him out there and do it, and so it was so pretty cool.
Yeah, that's what I love about my new position now is like the amount of opportunity to hone my skills has been really nice. And, it takes a special kind of, preceptor in our world, or FTO, or, an attending physician or something like that, to allow those things, because it's hard to let go of that. And, it's really cool that you guys get to experience that same thing. And I mean, I'm sure you run into the same situation where you'll get the crotchety or crusty old doc or something like that doesn't want to give it up or anything like that. Yeah. But, or the really hard preceptor in that realm. But, it's crazy how similar the kind of paths are, but how short one is versus the other.
Yeah.
But we kind of talked about how you got in, why you're passionate about it, which I love. And what do you do on your off time? Like, you can't be a doc all the time, so you gotta love, doing something else.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, I'm into a lot of different things. Kind of enduro, motocross stuff.
Yeah.
Hunting outdoors. Obviously, I'm in Idaho, and so
Yep.
A lot of that.
Gotta eat.
Yeah. A lot of in the winter, you'll probably catch me in a duck blind most days when I'm not working. So
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Skiing, snowboarding,
Yep.
family time, all the fun things, right?
Yeah, all those things.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. And that's the nice thing about our area, is we get so many cool opportunities to do everything. I mean, like, summer times are great, winter times are great. This winter's kind of been sucky, but that's just been kind of part of it seems like. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's an important part of if you're like in the pre-hospital setting, or kind of emergency medicine or EMS. It's like you really have to have good hobbies. I think that's how you keep a work-life balance. So you must have to play as hard as you work. I think that's really important to your well-being.
Yeah. What makes you passionate about being an EMS and, flight, critical care medicine, ground paramedic? Like, what's behind your passion?
I mean, I think it's always, I think there's an appeal to doing the hardest job. You know what I mean? Like, you can, work in the clinic, and this is no diss on a primary care or anybody, in like the routine care setting, but, it's hard. It's like the challenge, you have to think quickly, and you have to, have a lot of knowledge base on a lot of different subjects. And so I think that's a lot of the appeal for me, is just to be, it's the challenge that it presents. I think I realize, sometimes I'm jealous when, I talk to a hospitalist or, another doctor, a specialist, to have such a narrow scope of what you have to do, and that you can know so much about one specific subject. And, I'm never going to be the master, but that's kind of okay, because it gives me plenty to work on for the rest of my life,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you say, kind of that master word kind of jumped out in your last sentence there. I feel like a lot of, EMTs, paramedics, nurses, especially when they get into like full-time ambulance jobs or go start flying on whatever realm, they want to be a master at everything that they do. Do you think that's even a possibility? Like, to have a master at what you're doing with so many different topics that we have to go over?
I mean, I think certainly you can become a master of specifics, like I'm the best airway person or whatever. I think it's the pursuit of mastery that's what's the most important part, because I think being realistic, you're never going to be the best at it, but you have to have that lifelong respect for the career and the job. And I think if you lose that, it's when you find yourself at the most risk, when you're like, oh, I think I know everything I need to know. And so anyway, I think that it's definitely a worthy pursuit, but I think no matter what, it's remarkable to me how, people who have been doing it a long time tend to be the most humble, and we can talk more about that. But, I think that's a big reflection of how it's the pursuit of mastery, not.
Yeah, I love that. That's what I just wrote down in our little notebook here, is because I try to take little notes as we talk, because come up with taglines and, ideas for classes down the road. And the pursuit of mastery just sounds like a incredible, headline for an educational series. So I love that, because that's perfect.
Yeah, there's just always so many things that you can become better at. You can always learn more about something, and things are, medicine changes too, right? So being on the cutting edge, I think there's been plenty of opportunities where medics have come up to me and said, hey, why don't we do this protocol? Like, this is going to, a lot of organizations I've worked at before did it this way. And, we have a good discussion about that. And, a lot of times that's actually become how we end up doing things.
Yeah.
And so there's there's so many things that you can do and learn about. I think that's what is the appeal.
Yeah. Which is awesome, which kind of brings me into my next realm of, what is it like on a normal day-to-day basis as a medical director and, an on-call emergency medical physician for agencies? Like, what does a normal day entail for you? I mean, like, is it pretty rough? Do you get a lot of phone calls? Do you get a lot of med control contacts? I mean, like, how do you go about your day?
Yeah, I mean, most days are just like any other day. I work like full time at the emergency department where I work, and I'll get calls periodically. I'd say it's punctuated by just kind of routine to like something bad went down. You got to know about it, right? So there's a lot of variability there, but for the most part, it's not a huge time pull for me. I mean, at least I don't feel like it is because I enjoy it. But
yeah,
a few phone calls, like if it's from one of my medics or one of the supervisors or one of the critical care teams needs some help, I like those calls. And to me, it doesn't seem like a big deal.
Yeah, which is nice because before you came, we had some differences in thought processes on medical direction.
Oh, sure.
I think it's
Absolutely.
a really great tool for us to be able to have. And, having that ability to be able to make the call, but do you feel like it puts you guys at more of a liability or a risk? Or, I mean, like, is there anything that gets put on the table for you guys? Like, do you end up taking that patient that we call you on? Is that like if we call you for like a refusal or something like that, like, hey, just so you know, like, this guy really doesn't want to go. I really think he should go. Does that put any liability or risk on your guys' plate?
I mean, I think it does to some degree. I try not to preoccupy myself with that because, it's like I'm here to do the right thing, and that's what I have to leave at the end of the day. But yeah, if I get a med control call, online, I mean, for the most part, our system is pretty serious about refusals and things like that, where, people, they need to explain like the risks of what their decisions are and things. So I don't think so really. We do have a policy, a malpractice policy for EMS that I'm part of my contract. And so, I just try to follow standard of care practice and, be an advocate for the EMS. And that's kind of what I worry about. But sure, there's some liability in there that's, not to be completely disregarded. But again, it's not what I'm really worried about.
Yeah, which is great because, Isaac and I talked a little bit about it on our last episode of like, if we preoccupy so much of our patient care practice with, the fears of, charting, like the more we do, the more we have to chart and blah, and all this other stuff, your patient care suffers. You kind of get an operational drift where you start to not practice at the level you once performed at because you're, you always think like I'm one refusal away from losing my license or something like that. So it's nice to know that we have that backing from our medical direction side of things that, we do have that malpractice. If something were to go haywire or something like that, we always do our due diligence in those situations, but it is always something that kind of comes up to the mind. So I've never really kind of gotten into the background of what it really looks like on your guys' end. So this is good for me. Yeah. And I think this will be good for a lot of people to kind of hear. I don't know, some of the previous agencies I've come from, we've had, anywhere from 2 to 4 or 1 medical directors. So I don't know how that feels with just you being the sole guy, the man, the myth, the legend. So, do you feel like a multi-medical directorship would be a good thing at some point, or
certainly
as it grows? Or
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of so in one of my endeavors, I'm a co-director of a critical care team, and so it is nice because there's a lot of things where I want a policy to read a certain way that I can get a second perspective. So there's certainly benefits to that, to having people, and there's a lot of breadth with medical knowledge. So if you have a director that's maybe more experienced with critical care ICU as opposed to an ER doc like me, that can really be a benefit. So, and we use physician advisors as well. So
cool.
Yeah, so our critical care subspecialists in our hospital will help us with protocols if we have questions. And so it's I think there's you never really have to, as a medical director, I never really have to operate in a silo. I think that I have plenty of resources that I can tap, and most people are generally willing to assist with EMS because of what it represents. You know, it's kind of like the good frontier of getting out there trying to do your best and save somebody's life. So generally it's pretty easy to recruit people to help you.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, you know, kind of while we're on that topic, what as EMS providers like myself, what do you feel like we don't think about when we, you know, come to you guys for help? Do you feel like we, you know, come guns a-blazing a little bit too much? Maybe, I don't know, is there an element? I mean, there's always going to be that element of, you know, the adrenaline, the, you know, we want to get stuff done and frustration, but is there things that you see from, you know, providers from around our area or just in general from your experience that, you know, it changes how you interact with that said provider at any time? Or
yeah, so I mean, I think let me think about your question a little.
Yeah, I didn't.
No. It was a good question. It really was. That. I just need to kind of phrase what I want to say. So, I mean, there's a whole spectrum of presentation to how people approach me as a medical director. You know, there is some very overly aggressive ones. You know, the thing that I think I would say the most is when you approach your medical director with something you want to see changed, you know, you need to be ready to be a part of that change. Mm-hmm. So coming up to the director and being like, hey, I think we should be doing this. You know, I think you should have some kind of plan. Yeah. And be willing to do that to help. You know, your director, you know, like myself, and I'm sure the majority, there is actually in existence people who just do EMS medicine. Yeah. In some of the bigger cities. But for the most common, you know, medical director, you're going to have a guy that works a full-time job and he's doing it on the side. So, you know, be ready to be part of the solution. Don't just complain about things that you want to see changed. I think most medical directors want things to move in a good direction, but there's a lot of procedure and infrastructure that needs to go into place to make a change. And so you have to be willing to be a part of that. And so I think that's what I would say is probably the hardest thing when, you know, there's so many things I would love to do and want to do, but I really, you know, need people to, you know,
kind of pony up a little bit.
Yeah, you need to be a part of it if that's what you want. So
no, I mean, like, because that's huge. I mean, coming back to you guys, like, I mean, like, anytime that, whether it was with our previous medical directors or you or something like that, I felt like I did an okay job, that if I wanted to make a suggestion, that there was some follow through with it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we worked together in a different capacity when I was in clinical education for the system we worked for. And, you know, that it really kind of opened my eyes a little bit more to, in that capacity, to kind of see some of these things. Like, you know, people would come to me all the time and be like, we should do this. It's like, okay, like, I'm swamped right now. Yeah. Like, help a brother out. Mm-hmm. And, like, if you want to put some of the legwork in this, we can absolutely look at doing something. But, you know, that legwork never seemed to come through sometimes. A lot of the times it did. I will say that. But there was those subset of times where, like, there's really, really good ideas, and, you know, they would get kind of backburnered a little bit until, you know, we kind of got some of that legwork done. So, you know, there's so many moving parts to our relationship between EMS provider and medical directorship that I don't think really a lot of people understand. What do you think is the number one thing? Like, if you're going to go, say it's me and I come to you, what's the number one thing you want me to say if I've got an idea or, you know, a question, comment, concern, or, like, I need to put urgency behind a patient or something like that?
So this would be like you're bringing a patient in and I'm like there.
Yeah.
I mean,
we'll role play a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, really, I think for the most part, so where we're at, we may be a little unique because we actually give report to the docs. Like, that's one of the things my group has been very serious about, which I actually value that very highly because it creates a good bond with EMS. But so in that scenario, it's usually, you know, just basically like, hey, doc, this guy's sick. Yeah. I mean, that's it, you know, and if I trust you and I've known you long enough, you don't need to say anymore. I'll probably be standing up from my chair and walk into that room, you know, because you said that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good part of it. And I think, you know, along with your previous question, I thought of something else I wanted to say. Yeah. So what are things I wish people would do? And honestly, I wish people would ask me their questions more. Yeah. You know, I think people are generally afraid to pick up the phone and call me. I try to give my cell phone number to my medics. I actually, you know, I don't think people call me as much as I thought they would. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I really think that, you know, if there was a conflict or an issue or whatever, I kind of like I don't mind taking that call because I can get ahead of anything and be ready to be your advocate or ally in certain things. And so, I mean, that's one thing I wish, people would be more open to contacting me sometimes. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a kind of a stigma on our end more than anything of like, the more we call the medical director, the more they feel like we're incompetent. And I don't know if that's truly a case or not, but like, for the longest time, like you would get kind of shit on for calling a medical director by your peers more than anything, not by the medical director himself. It's like, oh, you had to call the medical director on that? Like, what are you, an idiot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something we should look at changing just because, I think there is that kind of bravado of like, hey, I got this, I don't want to seem like I need help, but it's like, you're kind of a fool if you don't seek help, because I mean, I think that's the way we got to change EMS is sort of like that. We're strong, independent people. We don't need to ask for help. Right.
Yeah.
That's something that I think we should probably evolve as an organization or service to change, just because, if you think like that, I mean, you could do so much better.
Yeah.
With help. Right?
I've learned some of my most valuable lessons by, basically phoning a friend. Like, I can't tell you how many times that I've called a doc and been like, hey, this is what's going on. This is kind of my path that I'm going down. Is this something that you kind of agree on? Do you, from anything that I've told you, do you notice anything different? And they'll be like either yes or no. And then, I mean, like, say it was something like treating a hypertensive patient, like, I want to give this medication to bring their blood pressure down. They're not having any stroke-like symptoms, but, it's a hypertensive crisis. Like, how do you feel about this? And they'll be like, yeah, that's great. Like, let's start them on that, reassess their vital signs in 10 minutes, and we'll see you when you get here.
Yeah.
Like, it's that easy. I mean, it's nothing to be afraid of, and it's nothing to really, kind of put your tail between your legs on by any means and make you look dumb. So, I mean, like, we're not here. We're all here for the same goal, and that's to take care of people and, of course, come home safe when it comes down to flying. So, I don't know how I turned dictation on our notes here. They get all messed up, but
yeah. I think that's one thing that I hope that, we can get away from, is feeling like you're afraid of looking dumb or something like that for asking a question. And I think that, I realize from where I sit, there's like a whole spectrum of a provider, right? Like, the new medic is going to need a little more help, right? Yeah. And so I don't look at that as like, I try to see people for what their potential is rather than what they are at that moment, right? So I think about, hey, this is a new medic. Like he's nervous about this. He's uncomfortable. What can I do to help him? And I think that's the way I like to approach it, and I wouldn't say that's how everyone approaches it. And I wouldn't say that's how people approached me when I was in training. Like there's a lot of like, hey, you're an idiot. You know what I mean? A lot of that. And I learned from that too, but I just think that's not the way we should go with education. I think it should be this, bringing everybody up.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And there's so much of, so much changing in the world of education from, sims are being released before simulation dates. You can kind of get a glimpse of what we're going to be going over and kind of building that education on more of a positive aspect, which, in my old, I've been doing, being in EMS for almost 15 years now. Like that's been a kind of a hard change because I mean, like I liked going in and having the surprise and, learning from the mistakes. Do you feel like we're kind of going away from, learning before the mistakes happened, or like, I don't know if that really makes sense, but because I mean, like, it seems like we learn from, little mistakes here and there, and then we just kind of start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Is that something that you'd like to see more of, is, preparing before the undoubtable mistake happens?
Sure. I think that's always the ideal way to do it, as much as we can strive to not mess up before it happens, that's always good. And I think we have to have that culture of, like a constructive, disciplinary culture, I guess, and maybe that's the wrong word, but basically when, there are mistakes made, we have to, instead of being punitive about it, has to be like, hey, do you understand why this was the wrong choice? And build someone
kind of
up.
Just culture.
Right. Just culture. That's a good way to say it. I think certainly, we try to emulate or try to simulate the, pre-hospital environment through our sims and all that kind of stuff. And that can really help to kind of put you in that mode where you have to make a decision before it's real, you know? And so you kind of, if you've gone down that algorithm in your head, it's a lot easier to have the courage to take action, you know, when it really is hard, right? When the screaming parent is there, or when you know, something real bad. So I think that's an ideal way to do that.
Yeah. That actually segues into really a good question. And one of the topics that we kind of thought about talking about tonight is kind of pulling that figurative trigger on, you know, how do we get in the mindset of, you know, we have to do this, we need to do it, follow through with it, kind of that task chunking side of things. You see it through to the end. Like, what do we miss in that the most part? I mean, like, what are your thoughts on, you know, just the phrase of pulling the figurative trigger more than anything?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of a continuous process that you have to review. And so when you're talking about pulling the trigger on something, it's like, you know, I'm going to take that airway, I'm going to do the intubation, or I'm going to, oh shoot, I can't ventilate, can't oxygenate, I'm going to crack this person, right? Those are the hard ones, right? So I think the best approach for that is to have done that before.
Yeah.
Not necessarily physically.
Yeah.
You know, of course, and if you can say you've done a sim, that's really helpful. But it's in your mind, you've been there, right?
Yeah.
So how often do you have, you know, when you set up for your intubation, do you think, okay, step A, you know, I'm going to do your preparation, all the things that we do to get ready. If I can't pass the airway, what am I going to do next?
Yeah.
Okay. And if that fails, what do I do? Right. And then you get to that point where, okay, you know, LMA doesn't work, or, you know, I can't ventilate the person, you know, then I'm ready to do the crike. Like, you've already pulled that trigger in your mind. So it's like all about having that done before the actual decision is made. And there's an interesting case about that, and this was a discussion I had recently as well. But if you ever want, there's a lot of websites that have posted on this, but there's a lady named Elaine Bromley, and you read the story about what happened to her. And just to summarize, it was a person that went in to get surgery. It was like a routine procedure, and they had a lot of qualified anesthesiologists and ear, nose, and throat specialists, you know, people who can manage airways and should be very good at that. Things just went south. Like, they couldn't get the intubation, and they just kept going, and they kept trying it, and they, you know, they couldn't, you know, I don't recall if they had a supraglottic airway. They couldn't get anyway. And long story short, you know, at one point, one of the nurses in the OR said they brought out a crike kit, right?
Yeah.
And then no one kind of clicked with that, right?
Yeah.
Everyone just kind of, they didn't have that decision tree ironed out in their head, and so it never came up, right? And so this lady developed an anoxic brain injury, and, you know, I believe subsequently passed from that. And so certainly I could see that happening to a professional anesthesiologist. It could happen to me too, right? And
so it happened to me.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's like one of those things where you have to, you know, if you're driving to the call, you know, 45-year-old male, cardiac arrest, CPR in progress.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? What's my number one priority when I get there? You know, apart from making sure the scene's safe, it's like, I'm going to be making sure that high quality CPR is taking place. I'm going to get the pads on. I'm going to find out what the rhythm is, get them defibrillated as soon as possible. You know, all those things, you know, if it's a shockable rhythm. So, you know, it's that kind of pre-engagement that happens in your brain. That's, I think, what's the most important. I think, you know, and then when you get to that trigger, you're kind of like, I already know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I really like, you know, there's a lot of people out there that, you know, will kind of shy away from, you know, like protocol or algorithmic based, you know, practice. But I find a lot of comfort might not be the greatest word for it, but, you know, I feel like it helps me down my pathways a little bit more because, you know, I like checklists. I came from an agency that used a checklist for a lot of things. And one of them was, you know, just our standard RSI checklist. And like, at the very bottom, it was basically like you're always prepared for your crike. So you always knew, like, if you got through all of these steps and so many intubation attempts happened and you can't get an airway with, you know, changes of blade size, changes of tube size, changes of provider, then this is what you have to do. Like, those decisions were made in my brain before I even knew, like, what I was getting into at that point. Like, it was that pre-departure, you know, kind of checklist that already kind of happened in my brain. And I don't know, what do you think about like the algorithmic approaches and the checklist? Do you feel like checklists are going to be a good thing? And, you know, they seem to be getting more popular, and, you know, do you see that kind of hitting the wave?
Sure. I mean, I think, everybody's brain's a little different, right? And so I think for the most part, things like that, checklists are very helpful. And I think the algorithms can really offload you cognitively. I think that's another thing I'm a fan of is when you have a hard decision to make the least amount of decisions possible, right?
Yeah.
So if you've already kind of decided how things are going to roll, when you get to that hard turn in the road, you're going to be a lot better off. And so that's why I'm like, if you're working a pediatric code, you're like, you're not going to be calculating doses. You're going to be pulling out the Braslow, right? I don't care what the equation is for the ET tube is. Go with what the color says, right? And so it's
love that.
Less decisions. You're more free to make the hard ones, the most important ones, right?
Yeah.
So I think that if the algorithm, if you embrace that, I mean, I can understand if your brain just doesn't go that way. It doesn't work for everybody. I think generally for most people, it's kind of the ideal way to do it.
Yeah. No, which is good. I mean, like, I'm glad that you brought up that it's not going to be perfect for everybody because nothing's perfect for anybody, right? But kind of on a side note here, let's get back to your little bit of a little medical directorship here. I got a kind of a screaming question in the back of my mind, or like on the back end, say like we had one of these situations. This actually kind of tailors into it to what we were talking about pretty well. Is like, what are some of the unseen battles that you fight for your EMS providers on a day-to-day basis? Like they go and give a report to one of your partners, and they come to you and they're like, "Oh, this is the shittiest report from this provider," and blah 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 blah. Like, how do you go about that? I mean, like, what are those unforeseen battles that we take for granted on our end because you're our safety net between everybody?
Right. Yeah. So I'll start out by saying, a lot of times I get really great compliments, right?
Yeah.
People are like, "Hey, your medics did this today. They did this awesome code. They got ROSC on this person. They did an excellent job." I get a lot of that. I'm not even going to, pretend like that's like actually probably most commonly that's what I get.
Okay.
And that's awesome because it's like, hey, in a way, like it feels like that's my victory too, right?
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't there, these are my guys and gals that went out and did it.
Yeah.
So I'm super happy about that. And so like, that's a good part of it. Now there is a fair amount of complaints too, right? And so that's not what
everything, right? Like, it doesn't matter what part of a healthcare system you work in, there's always going to be those complaints. So, I mean, like not even to single out like EMS agencies alone, but just like, what are those, what's that look like?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. I get sometimes a call where like, "Hey, can you believe this? Like what happened, and I guess my approach is initially I just take the report. I just listen to the person. A lot of times it's a venting session, right? Where they're upset about something not even related to the EMS, right? It's like, I was so busy and they kept bringing me people, it's like, well, that's what their job is, right?
Yeah.
Like they people call, we all, right? So, so that's, so a lot of part is just listening. But second, 9 times out of 10, there's really not even a problem. It's a miscommunication most of the time, right? So it's like they don't understand protocols. They don't understand that we only have a certain amount of meds in our box, right? They don't understand what it looks like on the scene, like what was going on, how unideal, the pre-hospital environment can be. A lot of that, right? And so 9 times out of 10 of that. Now, 1% of the time, there is an issue where I come back to the medic. I'm like, "Hey, let's talk about this. Something didn't go right." And, I try not to let the doctors gloat about that, because it's like, I look at these people of like, these are good people that want to come out and work hard. They're trying to do the best thing and they're going to make mistakes. Right. And so I think, we need, as long as there's nothing malicious going on, I use it as a teaching opportunity, and I try to have that in private with the medics once they come back, or when I can talk to them. So I'd say that's kind of how it rolls. There's some people who are perpetually unhappy, and I learn to tune them out, because I'm like, "Hey,
I've never really ran into some of those, luckily for us, we have really awesome physicians in our area, like that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And, I've never really ran into those issues before or anything like that. But how do you feel like the receptiveness of feedback is for the EMS provider these days? Do you feel like they're getting more gun shy on feedback, or, taking these as learning lessons?
It might be. I haven't really thought of it that way. I mean, I think certainly there's discussion on like generational differences and how people like to receive feedback. I think it's important to be receptive to feedback, or at least train yourself to be able to accept it, because it's really hard when you'll have a medic that doesn't want to listen, or they get really defensive, because it's hard to help them change or be better. And I think that sometimes identifying like, hey, I'm really worried that this doctor's going to think I'm dumb, it's like, if that, getting over that, it's a big thing. So I think there is some changes with that. But I think we can all get past that. I think once you get a little confidence, realize like, hey, you're doing a really good job. Like you've probably saved a bunch of people, right?
Yeah.
If the lay person, average Joe sees what you did on a daily basis, they'd be like, dang, dude, like you're a cool guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, think of it that way. Right. And so you can always get better.
That.
Yeah. I think about it sometimes too, when I get, if I'm down or have a bad shift, I realize like, hey, if my college self saw what I was doing, I'd be pretty happy right now. You know? And so I think wow, I turned out to be a cool guy,
Yeah.
And of course you forget that. You forget it.
You hang out with me, so you got to be a pretty cool
guy,
that's right?
That's right. Yeah, that's true. But I think that's kind of the attitude you got to have, and realize with your, accepting feedback, it's very important. And I think, you're really doing yourself a disservice if you can't accept feedback. And so that'd be something I'd encourage everyone to work on. And I also need to work on that.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, like, I can't, ever since, I guess I shouldn't say ever since. I mean, like in my early years, I mean, like it's hard to take that feedback. I mean, like, cause you feel like you're coming out of school on the top of the world. Like you've got this brain full of fresh knowledge, and you don't realize that you forgot half of it by the time that you're actually starting to, actually practice. So learning how to take feedback and just saying, I really appreciate that. And, I didn't think of it that way. And, I really appreciate a lot of those times where, I get those moments of feedback, whether it's good and, or, you got to take your little lickings every once in a while, just like it normally is. But
I want to piggyback off what you said there, because I think about like how valuable it is when somebody does give you feedback.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because we've kind of evolved culturally to be away from like, hey, you're doing this wrong. You know what I mean? Or like, we don't say that very much anymore. We don't point things out as much. And so if you have a mentor or somebody who takes the time to correct you on something, that's extremely valuable. And it's something that, if we could become more receptive to that, how much better you can be. It's a, looking at it as the true value of what it is, I think can really change, how you respond.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just even like peer-to-peer stuff too. I mean, it doesn't always have to even come from, a level above you, or, your nurse counterpart or your physician or anything like that. Just like that availability to take that feedback, positive, negative, and, or just be able to deliver it is huge. I mean, like there's so many times that I can think back that I could have changed, how I could have given feedback, or I wish I would have given feedback on a certain, call or a topic while training somebody new, that I wish I would have known a long time ago how valuable it really is, because I spent a good part of my, last 3 years helping train and, prepare new flight paramedics and nurses and critical care providers, and really got into a comfortable mode of, having that, kind of formal debrief and, call to call, talking about all the good things, and then adding some, good clinical value towards the end. And, there's so many different ways to go about it. Do you have a favorite way that feedback's delivered? Is there, a specific way that it should be done? I mean, I've heard of like the reverse the butts type story or I
think you taught me the feedback sandwich one, where I think you told me that like way back when we taled about how you say something good, then tell them what you need to work on, then finish on something good.
The feedback sandwich. I remember.
I think you taught me that. I don't know. I think the best thing is authenticity.
Yeah.
I think if you've worked with someone long enough, a lot of the medics I have now, well, there's a fair amount that have been doing it longer than I've been alive. You know what I mean? Like there's a couple, not really, but they're close. But there's some of the medics I've seen from like paramedic school on. Right. Yeah. And so, I think it's building a rapport and, sort of knowing that building trust with that person, if they know that, hey, if Burtis is going to talk to me, it's going to maybe be not so pleasant for a minute, but then I realize like, hey, he actually does have my back at the end of the day. Then, I think that's the best approach, and that authenticity component. So,
no, which is awesome. And, I kind of want to tailor this out because we're getting towards about an hour long here. And, one of the things that Isaac and I kind of talked about when we were trying to put together our lecture today was, what is something that you have brought to both of us? And, in the years that we've been working together. And I got a piece of paper here, and it is the good old Dunning-Kruger effect. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown on it? Why do you give it to the new paramedic when you do your presentation?
Sure.
What is the Dunning-Kruger effect? And just give me your spiel.
Yeah.
I love it.
Is that all right if I
grab it, man.
All right. So I kind of took a liking to this, the Dunning-Kruger effect I just kind of thought about how as you progress throughout your career, there's like these ebbs and flows of how your confidence and your experience, how that kind of affects. And so I think we'll probably be able to share that at some point. But, I notice a lot of people, how often is it that you've gone to a call when a family member comes out of the back room and says, "Hey, I'm in medicine, I'm in healthcare," and you're like, and they're like, "I've got all these ideas, you're buddy, like how we're going to save this person. I was a CNA, and you're like, oh gosh, you don't know crap." But they tend to be the most confident people around. Right.
Yeah.
So it's funny how when the people with the least experience tend to have the most confidence. Right.
Yeah. And
then to compare that or contrast that to when I was a new doc, some of my first partners, I'd be like, well, hey, I think this person's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with them. And, if I was going to bounce that idea off of one of my older partners who had been out for 20 years, I noticed that they were super cautious about things, and I thought, wow, why is he, I mean, all the studies say this should be this way or whatever, and it should be fine. And he's like, well, I've had it go the wrong way. Yeah. I know what it's like. I know what can go wrong. And so I noticed that, the experts didn't have that exact foolhardy highest level of confidence. People who'd been doing it for many years, they tend not to think of themselves as, that they don't answer definitively to some things, And so I noticed that with time. And so what I thought about is, the medics that I worry the most about when they come out of FTO, when they're on their own, is the ones that are super cocky.
Yeah.
Like, oh, dude. You don't know, what you don't know. Yeah. That's the problem, right? And so I worry about them going on to, make mistakes or, act hastily. And then, I've also seen people who are the smartest ones, right? And they're they just have no confidence at all. And so I noticed that, if you look at the graph, there's people who mid-level experience, sometimes they have the least amount of confidence. Yeah. And I thought that's an interesting thing, how sometimes you go through this really humbling period where you feel like you don't know anything. And so it's a tough rise, but you never reach that same level of, confidence that, even as an expert. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of a cyclical thing, it goes throughout your career. You'll have a bad case and you'll feel down. And so I just think that's an interesting way to look at your career, with your confidence level is going to vary. That doesn't mean that your experience isn't good. It just means hey, you've seen a lot of things, right? And so how complicated it can be to take care of a sick patient.
Yeah. I think, I've kind of hit a little bit of that realm over the, probably the last year, because I really kind of got in the strive of my, my knowledge base and increasing with, just all the different courses that I take and preparing for lectures and all this other stuff where I sit there and realize how much that confidence and competence kind of needs to balance each other out the more and more that we kind of move in through this. And there's this kind of this old EMS side of things where it's just within the first 2 years of your career, you're going to be involved in a iatrogenic death or something like that, or you're going to aid in taking someone and, pushing them down the drain hole. Do you think that has any part in the Dunning-Kruger, or do you think that's just kind of a myth, or
I sure hope it's a myth.
I mean, I do too.
See people, I always resented that when people are like, oh, they killed this guy or whatever, by something. And I mean, sure, that does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but, I think that it's, you're going to make mistakes, right? Yeah. And so as long as you're doing your best, I think that's all you can do, right? Yeah. But I think that there's a part of it, you get a little burned sometimes when, you think cases getting the wrong way, or you miscall something where maybe a patient's in failure and you give them fluids because you thought, oh, I thought something else was going on. I thought it was sepsis, for example. That's the kind of stuff that happens. And so I think that has a fair amount of it involved. Like it's very humbling to be a provider. It's hard to call the shots. And I think that's one thing that makes it difficult between nursing and EMS, right? Because in EMS, similarly, your training level, as a nurse, you don't really call the shots that much, right? Like you do what the doctor orders, right? Well, unfortunately, you have that uncomfortable, like, hey, I'm kind of on my own when you're in the pre-hospital side, right? And so I think that when you have to call the shots and you see sometimes you call the wrong shots, right? And so that's coming to grips with that.
Yeah, I've called the wrong shots multiple times, and, but I've learned from those lessons, and I've moved on and taken those tidbits of information. And, it's really kind of comforting, from our end to hear a physician that's been doing it for quite some time, especially in your role, talk about these things. Cause I mean, like it's good. These are good things that people don't get to hear. And, I hope we reach people with this because, these are really good things that we've talked about tonight. And just, the comfortableness of that it's okay to make mistakes, that it's, we use them as learning events, and we do these things for a reason, and we do our job for very well, 99.999% of the time. But there's also things that we can, that Swiss cheese model can always catch up to us every once in a while. So, there's a lot of things that can go really well, and, a lot of things that can go really wrong if you're not prepared for it at the same time. So, yeah, the Dunning-Kruger effect, because you brought that to me when I was in education over there, because that's what we started to do when we were passing off FTOs and kind of giving them that experience. How do you think that, did you notice a difference in the paramedics after you started as a medical director with any of the agencies, or like their humbleness or their confidence level?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think to some degree I could predict where they're at on the, it's a psychological theory, right? So it's like, it does apply. I think it applies quite well, but it's not perfect. But, I would see a lot of people who are overconfident, and those would be the ones I tend to watch very closely because they were, again, you don't know what you don't know kind of thing. So I think I've seen that. And then I've also seen, some of the mid-career people kind of in a slump, and, I like to say it for those reasons, because I'm like, look at all the experience you have. Like you're actually really knowledgeable and you do know a lot. I just think your confidence is down, and that's something that happens, right? It's a normal thing.
Yeah. How do you go about building that confidence back up?
I think, I think it's something that has to happen internally to some degree, but I think to help facilitate that is, expressing confidence, right? Saying like, hey, I appreciate what you've done. I appreciate the things you've done, and pointing out when they do good things, right? Because I think people tend not to always focus on their the positive things that they've done, or what, so I try to bring that to the front and express gratitude, and I think that can really help. From a medical director to a paramedic, I think that does help. Build confidence again.
Absolutely. So, with that and confidence boosting, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up here. We got one last little thing before we do our wrap up. As per usual, I got one final question for you. What kind of words of wisdom do you have, either for the paramedic, the new medical director, ER doc that's going to be dealing with paramedics a lot? What kind of words of wisdom you got?
I think probably, to speak to that broad audience, it's like communication and appreciation. Because, realize that the pre-hospital providers, the medics, the EMTs, they are in a really uncontrolled environment, and they're doing a very hard job. A lot of them aren't paid well enough for what they do. They're sleep deprived, just like the doctors. And so I think building each other up is a big part of it. I think that the ideal scenario is when the ER staff, the hospital, and the EMS embrace each other, because we're on the same team, right? And so I think that's having good communication and expressing gratitude to each other, I think really goes a long way. And I think that's how we make careers that are long and satisfying.
No, that's awesome. So, Chuck, thanks again, man. I really appreciate you coming down. I really appreciate you being a part of this. I mean, I guess we didn't really even tell anybody that Dr. B's our medical director here at Standby for Tone. So, we're excited to have you, man. Like, we're very grateful for you. And, you've helped us a lot in the short amount of time that we've been doing this, just from, random text messages, phone calls, and then agreeing to come and put ourselves out every once in a while. So we look forward to having you back. And, one of these times we'll have to, do a case review or something like that, do something a little off the cuff here, and dive deep into some fun medicine and things like that. But again, man, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. So everybody, I'm going to start my outro music because Isaac's not here to remind me to do things. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to having Chuck back with us again. We're going to try and schedule these probably once a quarter as we're getting going here. And like you probably saw our Facebook post. If you have any burning questions for the medical director or anything like that you want answered at a higher level, please feel free to call us, shoot a message to us, use our info at standbyfortones.com email. There's so many ways that you can get a hold of us. It's not even funny. We have more emails than we can even imagine. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all the fun things, and check out our content when you get a chance. Thank you all so much, and have a great day.